On Saturday, March 19, 1825, Savannah played host to the nation's greatest living celebrity, a combination war hero, freedom fighter, and founding father. His full name was Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Roch Gilbert du Moitié, commonly known as the Marquis de Lafayette, and he was the early 19th century equivalent of a rock star.
So Americans adored this man and pulled out all the stops to welcome him. Cities actually vied with each other to see who could give Lafayette the greatest welcome.
Lafayette's 13-month visit brought him to each of the then 24 states in the young nation. The competition was stiff, but Savannah was determined not to be outdone.
Naturally, here at the Owens-Thomas House, we like to focus on where Lafayette stayed, our house museum. In reality, his trip took him all over the city of Savannah. When Lafayette visited Savannah, the city threw a massive 2.5-day-long non-stop party. Citizens of Savannah waited here on the bluff for his arrival. This bell rang out to welcome him, and soldiers fired a cannon salute so loud it shattered local shop windows. Lafayette was greeted here by the governor and a group of Revolutionary War veterans. Then he climbed into an ornate carriage and headed off in a huge parade. That brought him here to Mary Maxwell's sumptuous boarding house. Today we know it as the Owens-Thomas House. He arrived here at 5:30, and tradition holds he gave a speech from this balcony. Then Lafayette was brought to the old Exchange building, where City Hall stands today. 300 of Savannah's most prominent male citizens, no women allowed, threw him a party featuring 50 toasts to everything from the Constitution to Andrew Jackson, after which he presumably stumbled to his carriage and headed home to the boarding house for the night. The next morning, Lafayette received a delegation of French citizens of Savannah here at the boarding house and attended church at Christ Church on Johnson Square. Then he came back to the old Exchange building, where he personally greeted hundreds of Savannah's citizens. It took until 9 p.m. Not surprisingly, he headed back here to Mary Maxwell's boarding house to try to catch a little bit of sleep. Then he returned to the Exchange for another military parade, which brought him here to Johnson Square, where he laid the cornerstone for this monument to his old friend Nathaniel Greene. And then 2 squares south, where he laid the cornerstone for a monument to Casimir Pulaski. Then he went to a general's house, where he helped dedicate a new flag for a local military unit. Lafayette enjoyed one more big meal before leaving town. Of course, this time there were only 25 toasts. Then the Marquis headed back here to the boarding house to pick up his things. He was supposed to attend one final ball here at the Exchange. Instead, he had to leave town early to make his next engagement. It's okay, 1,200 Savannians partied on without him. So, after all of the excitement in Savannah, a final military parade brought Lafayette here, back to the Savannah River, where he boarded a steamboat, sailed off into the sunset, or more accurately, off to Augusta, and started the whole cycle of parade and ceremony over again.
Give Lafayette some credit for stamina. It was a joyous time, but it was a very exhausting time.
So just what did this one man do to deserve such a no-holds-barred celebration in Georgia's first city? Well, almost 50 years earlier, as a 19-year-old, Lafayette sailed to America and joined in the fight for independence from Great Britain. He served with distinction in several battles and was wounded, helped secure important funding from King Louis XVI, and played a key role at Yorktown, Virginia, in the final Patriot victory of the war.
So in so many ways, he was invaluable to the Continental Army and the cause of the Americans.
There's no doubt the one European that Americans from north to south all admired was Lafayette. He was, in American eyes, a hero.
But it was Lafayette's less-known struggles for another type of freedom that earned him the most credit worldwide. He worked to end African slavery in France and in America. Lafayette viewed slavery as 100% opposed to the values he fought for in the American Revolution.
This is the first evidence that we have that Lafayette wanted to do something about slavery. This is a letter that he wrote to George Washington in 1783, and this is the paragraph right here where he asks Washington to join him in an experiment to free slaves. And the really remarkable sentence is the final one in that paragraph, which is, "If it be a wild scheme, I had rather be mad that way than be thought wise on the other tack."
Lafayette suggested that he and Washington jointly purchase a southern plantation and gradually free its slaves. Washington politely declined, so Lafayette proceeded on his own, purchasing plantations in a French colony in South America.
So his idea, number one, was by creating better working conditions for the enslaved people, the birth rate would increase and the mortality rate would decrease. He also thought that the enslaved people should be paid for their labor, and this was very revolutionary for the time.
When France began its own Republican Revolution, the Marquis saw an opportunity to enshrine American-style freedoms in his own land, and he worked to make sure this time everyone was included. Lafayette authored an important document, Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, patterned after the American Declaration of Independence.
And the very first article says that all men are born equal.
Though his political fortunes fell and he was jailed for several years, Lafayette continued the struggle for the rest of his life, reportedly telling a British abolitionist, "I would never have drawn my sword in the cause of America if I could have conceived that thereby I was founding a land of slavery."
So he was an exceptional individual and a person who believed that what he was doing, would change the world.
By 1824, Lafayette, now in his late 60s, was the last living American general from the Revolutionary War. The young United States was about to mark its 50th birthday, and President James Monroe invited the aging French patriot to come to America and revisit the scenes of his past glories. Lafayette jumped at the chance.
Lafayette wanted to come back. It had been many years. The last time he was here was in 1784. He wanted to revisit America before he died, and America wanted him to visit.
He was instantly recognized as the most important legacy still alive from the Revolutionary era. And this was kind of the last opportunity for Americans who had grown up in the shadow of the Revolution to now see this living legacy that was embodied by Lafayette.
Lafayette met with Black Americans on numerous occasions throughout his journey, but perhaps the most remarkable act of Lafayette's entire visit took place in the Exchange on the second night of his stay in Savannah. Hundreds of people crammed into the room to meet the great hero.
This was such a wonderful Republican event because anybody could come if they were white, if they lived in Savannah or nearby. This was an open house. This was their opportunity to see him up close, perhaps pass a word with him, and to be part of just all the excitement of the moment.
Black Savannahans were not permitted at this gathering or any of the other events associated with Lafayette's visit. In fact, the mayor had even published a notice in local newspapers beforehand to remind slave owners to keep their enslaved servants off the streets and out of sight. Yet at least one African American entered the Great Hall, an elderly male slave who had served with Lafayette during the Revolution.
The fact that a black man, a slave, was brought to the open reception on Saturday night to meet with Lafayette specifically and to converse with him is an extraordinary moment.
The event was so noteworthy, it was described days later in a newspaper. The great general died less than 10 years later, having enjoyed the satisfaction of seeing slavery ended in England, but not the United States or France. Interestingly, though countless American cities and towns are named for Lafayette, and he's remembered as a hero of the American Revolution, Lafayette's struggle against slavery has largely been forgotten. Until now.
I think the true legacy of Lafayette is not just his exploits on the battlefield in the American Revolution, but his unwavering commitment to human rights for all people throughout his long and very eventful life.
Lafayette remained very consistent throughout his life, very committed to the fight for human rights and up until the end of his life, both in America and in France.
Lafayette never wavered about these things. He felt strongly about slavery beginning in 1783. He felt as strong, I think, then as he felt when he died in 1834.